interpretation would Rabbi do that?
Okay.
Maybe it's just to say hello.
I doubt that. Okay. Okay. So we talked about the notion of annihilation as opposed to nullification yesterday. And then we said that in order to come to a state of something new growing out of the old, there has to be some nullification in the middle, and the usual metaphor for that is a seed being planted in the ground and then coming out as many more seeds, many more than went in. So the same thing happens to a person when he's mevatel his will, the lower will, then he can come to the higher will, and that's called bechol meodecha, with a love that is greater than can be contained in the vessel, as he says here. What does that mean? That it's the love that comes from above. It's Hashem giving him the love. It's no longer his actions. It's no longer dependent on what he does or doesn't do. It's a gift from above. That's called Ahava Rabbah. Shebchinat bechol nafshecha b'chinat hava shenkaven b'moach, as we said. Shebchinat kli. The regular type of love that a person can develop out of his will, that's called the love that's contained in the mind, meaning that the mind can understand the reason for it. There is a reason behind it. אבל בחינת ובכל מאודיך לא היה בשום כלי, אלא כלי שלה הוא מלכות פה ותורה שבפה קריננה. But the higher type of love, the love that he gains now after having nullified himself, as we explained last 2 days ago and 3 days ago, was the whole process of nullifying his will by accepting the yoke of heaven, in sur merav v'aseh tov, in both refraining from evil and doing good. So he gains a type of love that is called with all of your might, and that love doesn't have a vessel. It can't be contained in a vessel. So what does it mean that it can't be contained in a vessel? He says here, it's like the oral Torah versus the written Torah. The written Torah is contained in a vessel. Whether that vessel is the Ten Commandments that are written on stone tablets, but there's a vessel that's containing it, or it could be like a parchment on which you write the entire Sefer Torah. So those two things have a vessel. In the end, you put it somewhere. But this type of love cannot be put in any vessel. So that's why, meaning it's saying that this is it's coming from the Soviet. Yeah. So this type of love, because it can't be integrated into something, it can't be put into a vessel, he says the only way you can liken it is that it is like the oral tradition, which is developed anew every day, as it were. Again, every day when you learn it, it's like coming out again. That by the way, is one of the big problems that we have, right? Because our oral tradition is already written tradition. Because at some point, Rebbe said, if we don't write it down, it won't be preserved at all. So he had this incredible problem. What do you do? So he eventually decided you have to write it down, because so he wrote the Mishnayos down, and he wrote all the Toseftot down. He wrote down all the oral law that there was. So what is there? There's still, even though for us it's all written down, still reality is such that every time that you come to deal with reality, you have to take out of the great storehouse of information that you have to bring something new out. And that's especially true with Chassidus, because Chassidus is coming and saying, here's an area of human experience that there is no oral tradition about, or there's no clear oral tradition about, which is the psyche. So people come with problems with their psyche. So you have to find you have to take from the Torah something new. You have to darshan in a new way, which is everything that the Baal Shem Tov did. What's the big chiddush of the Baal Shem Tov? That we have to use the Torah to answer every single question that we have. So in a certain sense, Chassidus was the first big chiddush in Torah that was fueled, at least by the Baal Shem Tov, not by just pure thinking, but by needing to answer the call of the times. And the call of the times in the time of the Baal Shem Tov was that the psyche was being revealed. People began to live their inner world, and you had to give them answers about their questions. Like, why is it that my child acts this way and acts that way? And people didn't used to ask those questions. They just took care of it. They didn't think about it. They didn't think about, why do I feel depressed? Why do I feel like this? Why do I feel like that? Because the task of survival was so difficult that they didn't have time to ask these questions. And now suddenly they're asking questions about themselves, who they are, what is their purpose in life, and so on and so forth. And says the Baal Shem Tov, we have to bring answers from the Torah. So that's Malchus Peh. That's the, again, in the classic meaning, it's, as he says here, Asur Mutar Tamev Torah Kasher Pasul Matnita V'chulu. In the classic meaning, it's all the oral Torah that was developed halachically. But in the practical meaning, today, it's every question that has no answer that people come to you with, and you have to give them an answer based on Torah. So that becomes the Malchus Peh, Torah Sheba'al Peh. So what he's saying here is this is how... Right.
Everything you see over
right.
is a lesson.
Right. Everything is a lesson, but even more importantly, that the answers come from the Torah. That was the main thing. It's not just that Hashem is speaking to you from the world, but that whenever the Baal Shem Tov had a question, he opened the book. Mm-hmm. And people looked at the book, the answer is not there, so where are you getting it from? So, it is there. It's just that you have to have this quality of this love that is above the normal love for God. The normal love for God, he says, is in a vessel. Again, this is like charting a whole new course in what the relationship between man and God is. And in a certain sense, this is almost like prophecy. But the difference between prophecy and this is, prophecy would be like what you just said, that the Baal Shem Tov said, whatever happens, Hashem is talking to you. So a prophet would understand what Hashem is saying. Here we have that from the Torah that's already in our hands, from all the books that we've written already, comes the answer to these questions that people have. And that requires, it's not prophecy, it's a different state of mind. It's a state of mind of learning how to darshan, learning how to interpret the Torah the right way. וזהו כן יעמוד זרעכם ושמכם, זרעכם הוא בחינת אור זרוע אשריכם זורעי, ושמכם בחינת ויעש דוד שם, קבלת אור מלכות שמיים, שהיא בחינת הביטול, רכיבת הגרעין, שזה יוכל להיות הצמיחה. So he says, and this is what Isaiah means in chapter 66, that the way to ensure the continuation of the Jewish people is through this process. Zarachem v'shimchem. Meaning you have to be willing to sow the seeds, and you have to be willing to make yourself a name. And making a name, as is explained in the Tanya, in I think it's the Geras HaKodesh Vav, in the 6th epistle there, he explains that to make a name means to have bittul. Okay? So the Kabbalah Soul, it's the same thing. So basically it's talking about the same, if you want to be able to propagate the Jewish people, if you want to be able to ensure the survival, you have to be willing to do this process of zarachem v'shimchem, of sowing and nullification. And so that's what a Rebbe is. Think about it. This is a very, very important change that occurred in the Alter Rebbe's time. Until then, a rabbi was somebody that you came to with what kind of questions? Supposedly halachic questions. The Rebbe is a new type of spiritual leader to whom you come with all your questions. And again, as much as the Alter Rebbe didn't like to answer questions about the material world, he did. He didn't like it, but he did. When the Rebbe in 1950 wasn't yet the Rebbe, so I don't remember who it was, but there were people who began to ask him questions even long before. I just read this in Rabbi Gruner's biography. They say that there were people who asked him questions long before he became the Rebbe, meaning months before. And there was somebody in particular who had been asking him questions forever. And I don't remember. He said the name. Maybe one of the Levitins, right? Levitans. How do you say them? And so, at some point, he was concerned that the Rebbe wouldn't accept the leadership. So somebody asked him, "Do you ask him questions about material matters? And does he give you an answer?" He said, "Yes, I do," and he gives me answers. So he says, you should have no concern. Don't worry at all. Because if he wasn't Rebbe material, he wouldn't answer material questions. He wouldn't address questions about material matters. Because that only a Rebbe does. What I'm getting at is that in the time of the Baal Shem Tov, in the time of the Alter Rebbe, they were building a new Jewish leadership. You know the way that now they say, if you want to be a rabbi, you should also have a degree in psychology. Yeah, now it's like it's very common for people who go to lead congregations, especially in Chutz La'aretz, but it's also very common now in Israel. You have to have it, or you don't have to have, but it makes a world of a difference to have a degree in psychology. Why? Because most rabbis are also therapists in the end, right? For communal therapy and for private individual therapy. And so there's a lot to learn. Chassidus was based on this. Chassidus made the transition 300 years ago. That you can't be a rabbi of a community, i.e. a Rebbe, unless you have this, what the Alter Rebbe is talking about here. This ability to love Hashem in such a way that you get the answers to the questions of the community and the individual from the Torah. Which is why this whole thing of getting it from psychology is not very good. Because you should get it from Torah, you shouldn't get it from psychology. Not saying that there's no wisdom in psychology, but the outlook there is very different in what man is and what his purpose is. But what the world is now understanding, that's the transition that the Baal Shem Tov took Chassidus through 300 years ago. And it's very easy to see the difference between a rabbi and a Rebbe is that the Rebbe is first and foremost, he's a therapist. Even before he answers halachic questions. It's almost the reverse. It's understanding that the real issues that people have today are not the halachic issues. It's true that they also have halachic issues. And they have halachic issues because of their psychological issues. Meaning, if they ever come to you with a question, it's not so much because they don't know what the halacha is. They don't know what the law is. They don't know how to feel right about it. Meaning it bothers them. How to integrate it. How to feel that this is for them. It used to be very clear that following halacha was for you. It was something that you were doing for you. Hashem gave you the Torah to give you a good life, to give you life. But suddenly you begin to have people who have these difficulties with the laws. They say, this is not, I don't like this. This is doing something terrible to me. I just read, it doesn't matter. No. It's just an example, but it doesn't matter. והנה על ידי זה נקרא כנסת ישראל בחינת המתי שממשיכים שגם למטה יהיה הגילוי כמו למעלה. וזה שכתוב לעתיד לבוא מעיין בית השם יצא וישקע את נחל השיטים שהוא בחינת מים תחתונים שלא יהיו בבחינת ומשם ייפרד. והיינו על ידי בחינת אור מלכות שמיים וכל מאודיך שהוא בחינת באר מים חיים שנעשים המים בחינת מים חיים על ידי עוברם דרך הארץ ועל ידי זה נמשך בחינת ומעיין יצא והשקע. So he says here, this is like in passing, but it's because he's explained it many times in Shir HaShirim, in his commentary on Shir HaShirim, that what this really means is that the lower waters will be like the higher waters. The lower waters, right, after the firmament on the second day separated the waters, what does that symbolize? It symbolizes that the wisdom below is separated from the wisdom above. The wisdom above is one that is always with divine consciousness. the wisdom below, our wisdom, what we call Torah Shebaal Peh, what we call the oral Torah, that is not always with Hashem. What does it mean? It means that a person can learn shelo k'halacha, shelo kadin. He can say things, right? There's a prayer that you say before you go into the base medrash. Shelo et'eh v'shismechu b'chaverai. They shouldn't make mistakes, because you can make mistakes the moment that you're left to your own devices. It's not concrete halacha, right? You have all these questions. Am I really saying the right piece of advice? Am I really going the right way? Do I really understand the issue? What's going on here? It's not just a matter of halacha. It's also a matter of basic understanding of human nature. Do I really understand what the issue that this person has is? So he says, that's called, that in the future, he's saying, what we're doing now, adding the psychological, real-world dimension to, for lack of a better word, the pulpate, for the rabbinate, for making leaders who are able to address people's issues, modern issues. What we're doing now, that's what the prophet, that's what Yoel said, that there will be a wellspring coming out of the house of God. What is this wellspring that will come out of the house of God? He says it means that clean, clear water, not salty water like the oceans, which indicates a state of being separate. That's like the waters below the firmament. They're salty because they're crying, as it were. They're crying because they're separate from God. So he says, no, a wellspring, a fresh, clean spring water will come out of the house of Hashem, the house of God, meaning from every, what is the house of God today? From every seat of some Rebbe, where he sits, where he teaches, where he accepts people, and he talks to visitors, and he consults them on their problems. There will come out a spring of fresh water, which means that the wisdom there will be just as connected to God as the waters above the firmament, which represent the written part of the Torah. Okay? So the oral Torah will become just as clear, just as clean, just as not salty, not separate from Hashem as the written Torah. How does this happen? Like you said, by coming to the state of nullification. We have to have nullification to reach this state. So, by the way, that's also what we say about Torah and science. That Torah is in its totality. Here, I'm not just talking about written versus oral. I'm talking the totality of Torah. That's considered the higher waters. That's divine wisdom. And science and whatever else we've discovered through our own endeavors, that's called mundane wisdom. And mundane wisdom is separate from God. Science does not reveal God. It doesn't show God in any way. Sometimes it even conceals him even more. But in the future, meaning now, our prerogative is to sweeten the lower waters, meaning to connect science to Torah in such a way that whatever science has found, to explain it in a way that it feels that it's no longer disconnected from God, that it's actually revealed something true and real about godliness, not just about the mundane reality. Okay. וזהו ראה נתתי לפניך את החיים ואת הטוב ואת המוות ואת הרע. ומבאר לעיל דבחינת חיים זהו מאשר למעלה מהפרסה, ומוות נקרא פסולת שנתברר מתחת הפרסה. So you remember that when we started this mimer, what did we say? We said you have to understand what it means to be alive. Okay. That was the very beginning, if you remember. Okay? צריך להבין. מה נקרא חיים? And he started, ויאמר אלוקים יהי רקיע ויהי מבדיל, ויעש אלוקים את הרקיע, והבדל בין המים שמתחת לרקיע ובין המים אשר מעל הרקיע. So he started by quoting the second day of creation and telling us about the separation of the waters. Why this separation? That was the question that we started with. צריך להבין, למה שינה במאמר זה יותר מבשאר מאמרים? I'm reading back on page 42. שנאמר עניין הבדלת הרקיע שני פעמים, ויהי מבדיל ויבדל. Why did God stressed so much the separation of the waters on the second day? So we said that there's a higher part of us and there's a lower part of us, and we got into that whole discussion. Now he's coming full circle back to answer that. And he says, so what is it that really is life? What is above the diaphragm, the organs that give life for real, not the digestive system, which just sustains life, but the purpose of life is the higher organs. And death, the opposite of life, the spiritual death, is by connecting to those things that are below the diaphragm, below the firmament, right? The diaphragm and the firmament here serve the same purpose. דהיינו עניין פאור שיוצאים מהפסולת יש גמור, הרי זה רע יותר מעצם הפסולת מצד עצמו. But the real issue is not death. He says there's something worse than death. What's worse than death? He says that's peor. That's this idolatry called peor. What happened there? We said that they took the excrement that was left over from the digestive system and they turned that into an object of worship. They turned that into everything. They turned that into the yesh. They said, this is what life is about. Which is worse. It's worse than just having a digestive system. I have a digestive system. What can I do? In the morning I have to go and clean myself. I have to get out all the leftovers from yesterday. I have to do it. What can I do? I'm a human being. It's no big joy, but it's what I am. This is how I'm built. But then to take that excrement and turn it into the purpose of life, that's much worse than death. He says that's actually worse than death. In the same way, goodness is actually more than life. If evil, if bad, is worse than death, then goodness is also better than life. That's a big chiddush. That's why he says later on in the Chumash we'll read, "Hinei natati lefanecha hayom et hachayim ve'et hatov," life and the good, et hamavet ve'et hara, and death and the bad. So how does it work? That goodness is life is the first level, and the good is higher than life. And the same thing on the other side. I give you the death, which is the first level of wasting your life. Yeah, waste. What can you do? And the bad. The bad is turning the waste into the purpose. Okay? So that's even worse. So what does it mean that goodness is greater than life? He says that's what it means. He says that 1 hour of dealing, of engaging in the goodness. And what is the goodness? Good deeds and tshuva. Which mean, like we just explained, that means nullification. Nullification. If I can... No, it says, right, this is tshuva and ma'asim tovim. Because learning Torah is like using the vessels that we have. Learning Torah normally, it's not that there can't be learning Torah, that we described it before, that you can empty yourself and then something new comes in. So there can be learning at the level of the keter, of the crown. But normally, the learning is within the bounds of the mind, of the heart, of what we already understand, what's within the books, as it were. So at that level, goodness is higher than that. And goodness means going beyond the vessel, through nullification, by nullification. By using nullification, you get to what's beyond the vessels, beyond the heart and the mind. Kitov chasdecha mechayim. And that's what it means when it says in Tehillim, your loving kindness is greater than life. It's better than life. What do we mean it's better? That to engage in loving kindness is better than even to be alive. And just to be alive is very good. To be alive is to serve Hashem, and to be healthy, everything's good. But loving kindness, to do loving kindness with somebody requires us to have nullification, to have Kabbalah soul, to have this acceptance of the yoke of heaven. Because all the worlds were created with 2 letters. That's what it says. Ki beka havaya tzur olamim, yud-ke havaya tzur olamim. God created, He formed the worlds with two letters, Yud and Hey. B'Yud nivra olam haba. The world to come is with the letter Yud was created. Ve'em kelo chashuvim legabei ma'uto ve'atzmuto yitbarach. And in the end, all the worlds, meaning all the types of life that a person can have, are like nothing compared to God's essence. And the only way to get to God's essence is through this process of nullification and accepting the yoke of heaven. And in general, it says that life is given by wisdom, and godliness can really only be attained by going beyond wisdom, by going to the crown. And again, the crown is the product of nullification. Chai velo b'chaim. What does it mean? V'achokma techayeh. I don't know what he means by. Here he says. I don't know what he means. I didn't look it up, so I don't know. Uchtiv ki imcha makor chayim. שאפילו בחינת מקור החיים הוא רק עמך תפל ובטל לך. So this we have many maimarim, many essays on, that God is called the source of life, is with you. That's how God is described. I said He's called. I mean, described. The source of life is with you, but that's not you. It's only that the source of life, whatever you call life, that's with God. But to reach God Himself, you have to go beyond life. You have to get to a higher level than even what's called life. And that's called goodness. The level beyond life is called goodness. וזהו עניין הבדלת הרקיע, שנאמר שני פעמים, והמשכה זו על ידי בכל מאודיך. And that's why there were two separations. Now he's answering the final question that he had. Why does it say it twice? Vayavdel. Okay. And what were they? Vihim avdil. First he said, let there be a firmament and it will separate. And then it says, God made the firmament and it separated. So why do you have to say that twice? He said even by light that didn't happen. He just says, Yihi o vayhi o. He said, let there be light and there was light, but it doesn't say that the light shone. Here, not only does it say that He wanted to make a firmament and He made it, but He wanted the firmament to separate and it did separate. So he's saying the two levels of separation are because we have a first level of separation, which is like the diaphragm, like the firmament. Mm-hmm. But even that only leads you to the higher organs, to the better purpose of life. Okay, so you have purpose. It's very good. You should have purpose of life. Every rabbi has purpose of life because he learns Torah and he teaches Torah. But you have to go to one more stage, one more separation above that. Meaning, until now, all of Torah was based on chokhmah, and wisdom. And all of Chassidus is about revealing the crown, which is the second separation. To say it in the language of Kabbalah, the two separations are that there's a parsa, it's called, between the Hey Vav Hey and the Yud, meaning between the lower world, creation, formation, and action, and the world of emanation. But there's another even greater tzimtzum, separation. It's not a separation in the sense of it's not called a parsa anymore. It's something way beyond that. A parsa means a curtain. And a curtain you can get through. You can put it aside. There's all kinds of ways to get through a curtain. If that's all that's separating one level from another, and here it's separating whether a person is going to be serving his bodily functions, or whether he's going to be serving his mind and his spiritual functions. So that there's no disconnect between the two. They're not really disconnected. You can always make it through. But to the crown, it's not a parsa. It's not called a curtain. What is it called? In the language of Chassidus, it's called a tzimtzum. It's called a contraction. And when Reb Hillel talks about it, he says this is an incommensurate separation. There's no. The way I think I explained it. Yeah, the way I explained it once was, I think I said it to you about this beautiful idea that it's like saying there's no exchange rate. You can exchange dollars for shekels because there's a curtain between them. You can pass the curtain. That's the exchange. You can figure out. But the currency of the crown has no exchange rate with the currency of the lower reality. It's just simply that there's nothing there. So how do you get across? You have to nullify. You have to stop being who you were. You have to go against your innate nature. And so that's the explanation of why Chassidus is different than everything that came before, because it's an understanding that to really answer the problems, to provide answers to the problems that people really have today, you have to cross this divide, which can only be crossed through nullification.
Yeah, family. So we'll finish a very short story.
Yeah.
I have used it for more Shema. Go ahead and do it. So Maggie the Misery calls him Zusha and says, I hear you fast the whole week. I know you eat on Shabbos. Says it's not the same. You don't eat every day. Right? You're damaging your body if you don't eat the whole week. So Zusha says, but you don't eat all week, right?
And Zusha, by the way, lived to 96. So.
Yeah. Says, you also fast
Don't
the whole
eat.
week. So the Maggie says, okay, says we'll make a deal, right? I'll eat something every day, and you'll eat something every day. Okay, so that's it. That's the deal. So Zusha goes on. The next morning he gets up 6 o'clock in the morning and finishes davening at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. What should I do now? Oh, I've got to eat. The Rebbe says I've got to eat something. Okay, so he goes home, goes to his house. There's no food in the house. There's nothing to. There's no food, nothing at all. So what am I do? The Rebbe told me I've got to go and eat. Okay, so I go to the Rebbe's house. So he goes to the Maggid's house, and the Maggid's not there. And the Rebbe is there, and he says, could you please give me something to eat? The Rebbe says, I've got to eat. And there's no food in my house. So she says, I'm very sorry, there's no food in my house either. So he says, just a minute. He puts his hand in his pocket, and he says, what's this? So she says, that's a coin, that's money. So he says, oh, could you go and buy food with that? So she said, yes. So he says, do me a favor, please. Take the coin and go to the market and buy me some food. I said, I can't go to the market, it's not for me, right? So she said, I'd happily
You wouldn't know what to do then.
Right. She said, I'd happily go for you, but I'm rocking the baby, the malach, in his cradle, right? So he says, that's not a problem. I'll rock the baby in the cradle. And you go, okay. So she takes the coin, she goes out to the market, and he's standing there rocking the cradle. And whilst he's rocking the cradle, he notices there's a book within arm's reach. Shlo. Okay. So he picks it up and he starts learning it. He's rocking the cradle and reading the book. And suddenly he notices someone's in the room. And he looks up and says, who are you? He says, I'm the guy who wrote this book that you're reading, and I'm not happy. He says, why? What's the problem? He says, you're not concentrating on your learning. He says, well, I can't because I'm pushing the baby. So the says, okay, you can learn,
I'll push
the baby. I thought it was a brilliant story. My wife was so upset when I told her. What do you mean he doesn't